Australian Calabrese Cultural Association program, Sono Calabrese, a program which is a conversation with persons from our community about their experiences in Australia and elsewhere. And I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to interview tonight's guest because she has over 50 years experience in the political life of this country, although she has never held elected office. I am, of course, speaking of Mimi Tamburini, who, amongst other things, worked in Bob Hawke's electoral office for 12 years at a time when Australia underwent profound changes. And she will tell us about her experience of working not only for Hawke, but also for Calvin Thompson and others, and of her experiences since she and her family migrated when she was a child. So welcome, Mimi, and thank you very much for participating in our program.
Thank you, Vincent. It's lovely to be here, and thank you for showing an interest in me. I'm old.
Well, no, thank you very much. It's nice. Now, as I've said, I think you were born in Calabria.
Yes, I was born in Varapodio.
And where is that? In case
Varapodio is near. I think everybody knows Oppido Latina. Yeah. So where they used to say that Varapodio was under the comune di Oppido. Invece Varapodio adesso è un comune.
Oh, thank you.
So it's Varapodio.
The province of Reggio Calabria.
Provincia di Reggio Calabria.
Yeah. Did you have brothers and sisters?
I have a sister that migrated. I was 9 and my sister was she was 7, going on 8. And we migrated here in 1958. Yeah. And then in 1959, my brother was born. So my dad felt his family was complete with a son.
Well, il figlio è arrivato, no?
È arrivato. Se non c'era un figlio maschio, things just weren't right.
What work did your dad do in Italy?
Papà, la storia di papà, brevemente. Papà ha lasciato la casa che aveva 19 anni. Do you want me to go in English or Italian?
Well, a bit of English because we're doing it in English.
Of course. Well, Dad left home when he was about 19 and he joined the army.
Right.
Then he was posted in the north, and then there was la guerra dell'Africa, they'd say. And then he was shipped out, and then the Second World War caught up with him, and he was a POW in Africa. So he left home when he was 19, and he was working with as driver or mechanic with the machinery, because I was looking at his concedo, and it says Caterpillar, Mobile, the Arme Armado, whatever. So he was more mechanic and driver, because when he came back, he was already a man of the world. He was 31. Right. As he was going home, still in his divisa, because he didn't have money to buy a suit after the war when he was released. And as he was going to his home in those tiny little streets in Varapodio, the most beautiful Calabrese girl was there. And he had to marry her. She was gorgeous. That was my mum.
And was your father Calabrese as well?
Oh yes, di Varapodio, tutti di Varapodio.
Oh, so he met, and that's.
Yeah, well, mum and dad lived opposite each other in the little village, the little town.
Right. And so you were the eldest of the children? Or?
Yes, I'm the eldest. And the eldest, as you may know, carries everything.
Well, it does. And do you have, I think, how old were you when you came out here?
I turned 9 on the ship.
Okay, do you have?
28th of March, 1958.
Yeah.
And 9 on the ship.
And do you have memories of your life in Calabria?
Oh, yes.
And what do you recall?
Well, I remember it's not that, they say you build your memories because your mom might tell you stories or things. But that's not true, because I remember everything. And as I was a young child there, I used to go to school. I remember my grade 2 and my grade 3, because we left when I was promossa alla quarta, 4th grade. So I remember my school. I remember that I loved school so much that I was always putting my hand up and always taking on little projects to do. And the main thing I remember is that our teacher would drive from Reggio every day to our little town. And she would give us the newspaper. This is children in grade 3 in Italy. and then tomorrow morning you come and you summarize it to your class. Well, no one would do it except me. So she loved that. So every day she said, Mima, allora, did you read? Yeah, which one? So I'd stand in front of the class and tell them what I read.
Yeah.
You know, those lovely memories. We had friends that lived opposite us, other little children like us. I remember an incident where, and then after school, which finished around midday, I would go across the road to the seamstress, come si dice in italiano? Quella che cuci. So the seamstress was the one sewing dresses and things for the Paese, and she would teach us, little kids, little girls, how to sew, how to knit, how to crochet, how to do embroidery. So by the time I was 9, I wasn't accomplished.
And I was going to say all this before you came on.
And I'm sorry, but I'm leaving.
Say that you might have been prepared for marriage.
Yes, you may even say that, because I was already an accomplished. I wasn't good at cooking, believe me. But when it came to embroidery and knitting and crocheting, as a matter of fact, I remember also that I was 7 years old and my mum started the copriletto, which in dialetto si dice trasparenti. So she started one with the crochet hook, and it's in white cotton. And she started it and she said, this is for a single bed and you're going to have to finish it. So every summer, I remember, and every given free time, I was with this trasparenti, and I finished it on the ship, and it's on display at the Italian Museum.
Oh, excellent, excellent. Now, your father had actually migrated before you.
Yes. When Papa was here in 1950. He arrived on the 14th of October, 1950.
Right.
I was born in 49, but by the time he arrived, Frances, my sister, was born in September. So he never knew his second little girl. And he was here for about 2 years, and he was working as a truck driver. So he would do Melbourne, Robinvale, Swan Hill, Sydney, and bring all the produce to the markets, and then Melbourne. E dopo 2 anni di quella vita, he was nearly dead. So he said, I can't cope with this. This is not a life for me, and Australia is not for me. So he decided to come back. But he always used to tell us, because you see, the beautiful Calabrese family, it's got to be told, when we used to sit around the dinner table, the beautiful oral history and stories that mum or dad would say would just enrich our lives, and we would listen, because that was the best thing we could hear. And he would say that on the ship back in 1952, he dreamt his father said, "Nino, aonde vai? Where are you going?" And he says, "Me ne vai a casa. I'm going home. I'm going home to my wife and my 2 little girls. I haven't even seen my second little girl." And he says, "No, figlio, tu ja torni. Chi ha tornato back to Australia? Never." Well, he came back. He came to Italy. He got a similar truck job, and the guy never paid him. So the poor guy says, "I can't do this."
That's unusual.
Very unusual for Italy. So in the end, he says, you know, this is not right. Il visto era ancora corrente, so the visa was still valid, and he came back.
So when did he leave the second time? What year?
The second time he left about 1950, just early 54. He was there about a year and a bit.
Right.
And he came back, and all his siblings were here. He had 3 brothers and a sister, and they were in Shepparton, and one was in Melbourne. And so all his siblings were here, and then the siblings decided they wanted to bring mum, old woman, here. And he was saying, "No, this is not a place for mum." But eventually she insisted that she wanted to be here. So once mum came, you know, he did the sponsorship or l'atto di richiamo for mum, for his wife and 2 little girls, and we arrived.
But so there was still a 4-year period when he was here on his own, and your mother and you and your sister were in Italy.
That's right. That's right.
And all right.
It was tough then.
Yeah. All right. And then you obviously came by ship, I think.
Yes, we came with the Neptunia. But I remember that in our little town, I was discriminated upon, me and my sister, because avevamo patto all'America. Right. So at lunchtime, we wouldn't be given the lunch because we belonged to someone in America.
From L'America, you see, to buy whatever you needed.
So, don't bring your spoon. Tu non portare un cucchiaio perché non è per te. So,
and do you recall the passage? How long did it take to get from...
We left on...
Messina or...
Da Messina. Da Varapodio, we had a car and went to Reggio.
Yeah.
From Reggio, we took un traghetto and went to Messina. And from Messina, we boarded that plane. And that moment, I'm an old woman now, been here a long, long time. But every time I think of that departure, it's almost as if I live at this minute. It was quite emotional. It was very, very emotional. I still can see my nonna on the port there. And the ship, the way it happened, huge, huge ship, Neptunia, with so many people. The way it departed from the port, it was like a slow motion. It was quite traumatic. Believe me, I remember it very, very clearly.
And normally it would take, what, about a month for the...
Well, we left on the 8th of March and we arrived on the 4th of April. So
and how did you fare?
On the ship, I loved it.
Yeah.
We loved it, me and the kids, because there was other kids from Varapodio that came. There was, do you remember Nat Suraci, the president of the Reggio Calabria Club?
Vaguely, yeah.
Okay, well, his wife, Carmelina, she was Paesana Nostra. She came with her mum to join her dad in Australia. So there was a few little girls came from the same town, and we had lots of fun. We loved when the bell went and we'd go and eat.
Yeah.
When we were running around playing. Port Said, I remember when we stopped there and all these, for the first time in my life, I saw a black person. It was quite amazing.
Yeah. You didn't suffer from seasickness.
No.
What about your mother?
No, she suffered from nostalgia. She would just cry every day.
So the passage was, the way you described it, was almost like a holiday on a cruise.
It was like a little adventure for us kids, like a little adventure.
And you landed in Melbourne?
We landed at Station Pier in Port Melbourne, and it was late afternoon, and the sea of people that were waiting there was incredible, and they were all waiting for this ship with all their family. And they were throwing chocolates up to us. And we were all running for the chocolates. And then my mum saying, "That's your father over there." And I mean, I wouldn't even know who he was.
I was going to ask, did you recognise your father? Because...
No, I did not. I mean, the way he embraced us and he was crying and crushing us, we knew it was him. And he had bought a house in Moonee Ponds.
Right.
That when we came, we landed in this, to us, it was like, my mum loved it, a beautiful little home. And she loved it. It was just a walk away from Queen's Park.
Right.
She started to adapt much more easily, but she was very, very nostalgic and, Calabria.
And tell me, do you know why your father chose Moonee Ponds as the...
Well, when he came, they used to all be in rooming houses. They used to have those houses when they rent a room. Each paesano, as they would come, especially if they were just the husband and the wife was obviously was in Italy still, they would all help each other. It was a real Calabrese close-knit family. Uno con l'altro, sempre. And he liked Carlton, but not so much. He just felt that it was too... He wanted a bit of space. He wanted to show something. He loved Australia. He loved Italy more than anything. Calabria. He bought this house in Moonee Ponds, and then his other brother Giovanni bought another one where Kentucky Fried Chicken is in Moonee Ponds now.
Right.
Street or Dean Street, which is now. And so they lived close for a while, but we were there for a few years, and it was beautiful.
And were there many other Italians nearby?
Well, there weren't as many as there are now. But because there was that smaller number, we flocked together.
Yeah.
We would help each other. And in that street, I would say there was about half a dozen families.
Yeah. And I take it you would have all socialised with the...
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
We would be very close.
Yeah. But nevertheless, your mother missed Italy from
what you were telling me. And yes, she would wait for the postino. Remember in those days, the postino came twice, a mattina and the afternoon, in the morning and in the afternoon, and he would blow his little whistle. And so Mum would be doing the things, and her ears would be, if the postino rings the bell, so that blows his whistle, so she would get a letter from her mum. So she was very, very nostalgic, and I still have visions of her when she would get a letter from her mum, and it would be just stained by her tears. She was so, she had no one in Australia except.
Yes, and did she ever talk to you about that feeling of nostalgia?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I think in a way, well, I was just a little girl, but in a way I thought it was her way of releasing her emotions. And it was always about Parapodio, Calabria, a terra sua. And then in those days, my father went off and bought a record player, which had a TV, a radio, and the songs he would play would be Terra Straniera. You know, if you weren't nostalgic, you would be. You know, Claudio Villa, Terra Straniera.
And was there a difference between your father's attitude, for example, and your mother? Was your father also nostalgic for what had been left behind, or?
No, not so much. He not so much. No, he was more. He was very well adapted here because all his brothers and sisters were here.
Yeah.
His mother was here. He had everybody here.
Whereas your mother
had no one.
I understand all her relatives were still back in Calabria.
Her mother and brothers were all still in Calabria.
Yeah.
Letters were the lifeline. She loved those letters, you know.
Yeah. And from other people have said that what they found strange in a way was not only the isolation from their native town, but the fact that the language was strange.
Yes.
And they couldn't, unless they had other Italian people nearby, they couldn't actually communicate with anybody.
That's right.
And that enhanced the feeling of loneliness.
That's right, exactly. And the isolation, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But we had an Australian friend next door, Mr. and Mrs. McGregor, Mr. and Mrs. Mac, and she took a love to my mum. She loved my mum. She had no children. Yeah. So she would say, Carmela, I will teach you English and you will teach me Italian. Yeah. I would say, ma che stai dicendo? She won. I said, she's going to teach you English and you teach her Italian. And my mum felt that, you know, she felt that she was okay with this woman who would bake little cakes and knock on the door because she had a stroke and she couldn't walk well. And she would bang on the fence and she would say, Carmela, send Domenica or Francesca to get the cakes, Carmela. And then Mum would say, you better go. She's got something for us. So there was a friendship as well that helped her to adapt.
Yeah. And you, of course, you went to school here in Australia as well.
Well, yes, me and Frances, my sister.
Do you remember your experience from?
Oh, yes. We were terribly discriminated at St. Monica's.
Well, did you learn English before you started school? Or?
Well, Mrs. McGregor helped us. We arrived on the 4th of April, and I went back to St. Monica's to get in the archives to get the enrolment forms, because I was doing research on that. And I discovered that we didn't attend school, or Dad did not enroll us at St. Monica's until July. So we were April, May, June, July. I mean, 3 full months. No wonder we loved Australia's kids. This was a holiday for us. So we would go always to Mrs. McGregor, because she was a former teacher. And she had an exercise book and the pens and everything. And we would literally do she did homeschooling, what we know now as homeschooling.
Were there other Australian children that lived in the same street? And
Yes, there was a Lorraine Pedersen who took to us really well. She became a good friend. And she convinced my dad to let us go to the Moody Pond swimming pool. It was just a brand new swimming pool in those days, in 58. Yeah. I think it was built in 56. So the Olympic Games were in 56. So we were just new land.
And did that help with your English? The fact that there was another person your age that you had to communicate with?
Yes, it did very, very much, because we had that opportunity to speak the language. So we picked it up very quickly, me and Francis.
Yeah.
But we went to school at St. Monica's in July, we would get by really well. We would get by enough to fender off any of the girls that would say, look, gee, that's a big slice of bread, because it was a big slice of bread. And we would say, and look at that, that's rubbish that you're eating, because it was a pie. We had, you know, we grew up in a sort of, I can't complain really.
Yeah. What do you recall of your school days? Are they a positive memory? Or?
Yes, positive to a point. I want to just share this little story. We had a sister, Winifred, who was principal at St. Monica's Primary School, and we had to have our uniform. That was a must. Well, one particular winter, the white shirt didn't dry. Mum said, well, you know, it was Monday and we didn't have dryers or anything. The fire was going, but it didn't dry and it was wet. So she said, put a little skivvy underneath. So she put a skivvy underneath and I had the tunic on top. Well, the following morning at assembly, when I went to school, Sister Winifred would stand there with her belt and she'd look around and she pointed, she looked straight at me and she said, you're out of uniform. And of course I said, yes, come up here, you awful child. And I thought, what did I do? So she said to me, now you stand up here on this seat and you will be an example to everybody. And she said in front of the class, in front of the assembly, this is the image of a disgraceful young student out of uniform. I will not accept this. And I thought that was the beginning and end of it. Instead, she allowed me to stay on that bench all day. I missed the classes, and lunchtime, nobody was allowed to come near me. But one other nun, the Sister Declan, she sneaked in and she gave me a little muff. She said, Mim, don't just forgive her because she's just an old nun and she doesn't know what she's doing. And I said, okay, fine. So I stood there. Well, the next day, while we were on assembly, the teacher's pet, Diane, was selling raffle tickets, and they were 1 penny. And I had 1 penny in my pocket. And so she came to me and said, Domenica, take this last ticket. I said, no, I don't want it. Please, please, she begged me. So I gave her the penny and I put the ticket in my pocket, and that was the end of it. In the morning, by lunchtime, they did the sorteggio. They did the raffle. So we were standing after lunch in assembly, and Sister Declan draws up the winner. And she says, it's number 21. And nobody's going to get it. She said, now come on, someone's got number 21. No one's moving. And this Diane is thinking, I looked at her and she looked at me, she goes, I think it's your ticket. And I said, mine? She said, now because it was Sister Declan and I had that experience, I didn't even want to know that I had the ticket. So I looked in my pocket and I looked at it and it was 21. And she was getting angrier because no one's coming up with the number. So she said, now come on, someone's got it. So I put my little hand up and I said, I've got it. And she goes, come here, quickly. So as I went there, she said, you! And I won a little homemade cake, which I took home. And when I relayed all that to Mum, she said, you see, God works in mysterious ways. You were rewarded.
There you go. That's so true. And to what year did you go to school? To what level here?
Okay, well, I went to what was then known as leaving. I think it was year 10 in those days. Was it?
Year 11.
Or 9. I don't remember anymore. It was too long ago, Vincent. Too long ago.
And just before we leave Moonee Ponds, eventually your father sold the house.
Oh, yes. We were very unhappy.
Behind it as well, isn't there, as to why he sold that?
No, he always told us that he didn't like it was umida, que muri erano umide. I don't know, we didn't understand what he meant. My mum wept like a baby when he sold this house because she had no say. In those days, the Calabrese man was the man of the house. And everything he did good for the family. So we had to accept all that. But it wasn't until after he sold the house that...
You're making me nostalgic now.
Pardon?
You're making me nostalgic.
Oh, yes. And when we went to this new house, we were very, very upset. We lost our beautiful friends. Glenroy, nobody knew where it was. No made roads, no nothing. And then afterwards, some months later, or years later, I don't remember, we were talking about it, and Mum said, what you did, you ruined the family to sell that beautiful little house. We were there with our paisani, close to civilization. Now here we've got nothing, just open paddocks. And Papa said, well, you see, he said, do you remember all those noises you used to hear and all those footsteps going down the corridor? And I used to say to you, it was me that I had just passed by. Yeah. He said, well, it wasn't, it was Bill. Who's Bill? And apparently Bill was another neighbor, Aussie neighbor, who was so excited that Nino was bringing his family with his two little girls that he would help my dad to paint it, to do the bathroom. And he was excited to meet Nino's two little girls and his wife. And then he organized for my dad to buy a bathtub, brand new, because they were doing the bathroom new. And somehow the bathtub wasn't delivered. And this Bill, who was an old man, he lived next door on the other side, and he went to Dad and he said, Nino, did the bathtub come? And my dad said, look, it doesn't matter, Bill, because I bought another one. It didn't come. It doesn't matter. And he seemed to get very, upset that he didn't fulfill his role as the friend. And he had a heart attack and died in that room, in our family room, in my dad's arms.
Gosh.
Said, and before you guys came, I had a little picture of him. And every morning I would see that picture face down. I would hear walking up and down the corridor. Sometimes the doors would open. I would literally see him. He said, I just couldn't live in that house anymore. So it was haunted.
By Bill.
By Bill.
And that's what led you to go.
And Mum wouldn't believe him at first. But when my brother was a little baby and he was in a pram, it was winter time, and Mum had him near the fire. And she was in a little room in the kitchen cooking. And suddenly the little boy started screaming and crying. So she raced up, and he wasn't in that spot. And he was rubbing his little hands. And he was on the other side of the room. Now, the wheels were that way, so that if the pram wheeled, it would be going down. Instead, it went sideways to the other side of the room. And so she looked and said, what? He was here. How did he get over there? It wasn't turned or anything. It was just moved. So she said to my dad when he came, she said, something really strange happened here today, such and such, and a little cinder flew from the fire and it burnt the little baby's hand, and he was rubbing his hand, but the pram was here and then it was over there. And Dad said, oh, you put it over there and you think you put it over here. And she said, no, I'm telling you, something odd is happening because it couldn't wheel that sideways. And in a way, now we believe that it was Bill removing Santo from harm's way.
And haunting the house. So that's an interesting story. How long did you live in Glenroy?
We lived in Glenroy virtually all my life. My mother's house is still there. It's still ours. We moved in there around 62, and my dad died when he was there. They always lived there. We always lived there. When we got married in 1968 with Justino, we bought a house in the same street.
Oh, lovely. Now, about your father, you said, did he continue the same job, truck driving, or?
No. In Australia, when he came back, he ended up getting a job with Sonadale Richardson in Yarraville, and he was a moulder.
Right.
He used to do the gearboxes. And
so he'd have to travel from Moonee Ponds to Yarraville.
From Moonee Ponds to Yarraville. And it was good then, you see. It's not that far.
No.
And when we went to Glenroy, Mum used to say, you pass Moonee Ponds to go to Yarraville.
And were other Italians working with him?
Yes, many Italians. Some that he brought himself, Gianni Capodio, that worked there. You'll know the wife of us, about 2 or 3, and others. There were a few. But in those days, there wasn't anything in a way of precaution, because next to Papa was a man who was melting bronze. And so you can imagine the poisonous fumes he was breathing. And he was a very, strong smoker. So one thing led to another. He ended up with emphysema, and he was only 59 and he had a heart attack.
Gosh, yeah. And how did your father drive, or did he?
Yes, oh yes, he drove.
Yeah.
You see, my poor mum, in those days when they got married, they had to bring a house. Le donne Calabria, in the paesetti, in the little towns, they had to bring a dowry, a glory box. Part of that dowry was a house.
Oh.
So when he decided to sponsor mum to come here, he said, sell the house. And mum, that was like selling the flesh and blood of her own mum, who worked so hard to get it for her. And so when she came with the money, do you remember Pasquale Inga? You wouldn't remember him.
No, I don't. No.
No, you're a baby compared to him. Anyway, he was a sort of agent in those days, and he was from our paesi, and he organized the transfer of the money. And as soon as the money came, the first thing Papa did was buy the TV for his children. We were stuck in front of a black and white TV with the radio, so he plays records and everything, and buy a brand new Vauxhall car, brand new.
Yeah.
So people in McPherson Street, Winnie Ponds, were looking at this guy thinking, where did he get the money to have all this? And that's because the mum sold the house in Italy.
And that must have been, if your mother was nostalgic, a very important event, because it marked a total separation from her native town.
Yes, no, mum suffered very, very, she suffered very much, and she suffered inward, if you know what I mean. She didn't show it, she kept it because, well, for the family and everything else. But in a way, Dad was okay, but he tended to be, I don't know how I can say, selfish. You know, he sort of didn't say, you see, Mum used to say, come, you buy a car, you buy Lucy this TV, when you had a mortgage, why wouldn't you get rid of the mortgage? So she was the sensible person, but he was the one who felt, we're in Australia.
Yeah.
My girls to have everything.
Yeah.
And here's a car.
Yeah.
A photograph of me sitting on one side of the Vauxhall and Francis on the other. And we must have been the only little migrants with cars, because my Papa was giving a lift to everybody. When friends would come to visit, he would drive them home. They would come by taxi and he would drive them home.
Yeah, but in a lot of other women have expressed the sentiment that they felt on leaving Calabria and arriving in Australia much more powerless here than they were there, because all of their networks of friends and everything else was just gone.
Yes, very, very true.
Yeah, and
Mum was like that.
was she?
Mum
Yeah.
felt very, very helpless to a point. I remember now that I'm an older woman, I know exactly what she did in a way. She endured. By the time we went to Glenroy West and bought a brand new home in this new suburb, she switched on real quick, and the roles were virtually reversed, because she said, I want to know what the debt is, because she would say, I haven't got money to buy food. I haven't got, and he'd say, I have to look after the mortgage, 3 kids, and you, plus me, plus the car. And she thought, well, I can't live like this. So she went and got a job.
Yeah.
And then she became not just the power, she was the powerhouse, the driving force, the engine.
Yeah.
Did everything in that house.
Well, because that was a means of empowerment, in effect, and independence.
Oh, yes.
To a large degree. Now, obviously, with respect, you're obviously an intelligent student.
Sorry?
Did you have ambitions of going to university when you were young?
Well, I wanted to be a teacher.
Right.
But life didn't work out that way, because you see, Papa used to say that his 2 daughters will never go to work in a factory.
Right.
So he decided to buy, I don't know if I mentioned this, but he decided to buy a little block of land in Glenroy near us, which was set aside for a little commercial place for shops. So he bought this little shop, and he brought this little block. He built a little shop, a delicatessen. And then as soon as I left school, I wanted to continue more, but I didn't leave school because I wanted to leave school.
No.
he pulled me out of school.
That's what I was getting at. Did you discuss with him, you know, look, I want to go on to university, I want to study?
Yeah, no, he said, you're going to work in this shop, you're going to get married, and you're going to have children, and you'll do what is right. And that was
and you did.
Korea.
But
But as soon as he, you know, I was in that shop, I felt so imprisoned, and Mum felt for me too. And she would speak to him. She'd say, Mim wants to go to school. You can't just bury her there. She's too young to just be buried there. She's got. Anyway, to make a long story short, I convinced him that a cousin of mine was going to a private tutor for business school. And it was a private tutor, and she would teach us how to type, to do shorthand. And I thought, this may be my vehicle. I might just make it this way. And I did. So at least he would bring me with his car to Albert Vale, and I learned Pickman's shorthand and typing with a manual.
Yeah, good. And you mentioned earlier that your parents would tell you stories around the dinner table.
Yes.
And I think there's one particular story that your dad told you about, which is
yes.
enlightening, involving a cockatoo. Is that?
Yes. Yes, or yeah, cockatoo. Exactly. You're right. In the early days, he used to tell us that they would meet in a little corner, the new arrivals, the guys with their wives back in Italy, and the compare would get a job for him, and they would all meet in this little corner. They all walk. They didn't have cars or anything. And then in the early mornings, when everything is still, and they would meet there, whoever gets their first waits. And then when the next person would come, they would say, buongiorno. And so the voice would echo. On the other side of the little fence where they were, there was and it would say, Dago, bloody Dago, go back to your country, Dago. And one of the new arrivals said, what's this? What's this? Who's saying this to us? Is it a man? He said, no. My dad said, look, it's a cockatoo. Obviously, the owner taught him these words, and the poor animal just says it when he hears the Italian language. Yeah. He understands it's the Italian language. And the paisano said, oh, so he's pretty intelligent. He goes, yeah. And he goes, well, we should fix him up. And Dad says, don't you touch it because we get into trouble here. But what's he saying? He says, d'ingiuria. You know, he says, he calls us names. So then every morning when whoever got there first would wait patiently, and when the other guy would come, he'd say, buongiorno, compare, buongiorno. Dago, you bloody Dago, go back to your country. Dago bastards, go back to your country. And this went on for many, many mornings. Well, one morning, the guy who took, offense to this name calling ended up being there first. And he was just standing there probably waiting for the opportunity. And Dad was just coming. And Dad, before he got to him, he said, buongiorno, compare. And the little boy went, Dago. And he had the umbrella because it was raining. So he turned around, he leaned over the fence, and he went, bang, and hit the bird. And as the bird was falling, Papa was saying the bird was going, Dago, bloody Dago. It's cursing the Dagos.
As you say, it's a funny story, but it reflects what some people actually thought about.
Well, but imagine the trouble of teaching a cockatoo, Dago, bloody Dago, but to distinguish language, word, to distinguish the language, buongiorno. So he knew it. As soon as you hear buongiorno,
start with the terrain.
He knew we weren't.
You mentioned your dad had planned for you that you were going to work and get married. You obviously got married. When did you get married? I think you said 1968. Or
that's right. Yes, I was only 19 years old.
19. How did you meet your husband?
Well, my husband's cousin works with un paesano in the concrete industry. And then this paesano came over for something. I don't even remember what it was for at home. This Calabrese came to him, and this Calabrese kept giving me the eye, but I wasn't connecting because I'm short-sighted and I didn't have glasses in those days. So he sort of came a little closer and he sort of introduced himself and we started talking a little. And then things sort of took off. And
Right. And do you know, had he spoken to your parents before he actually came into the home? Or?
no, not the first time. It was just with the
Right.
paisano that they came to pick up something. I don't know. But then afterwards, when he saw the beautiful Calabrese girls, because me and my sister,
Yeah.
he came back and he spoke to mum and dad that he would like the hand of Eddie.
Right.
And dad says, well, one thing I've got to say about my father, he wasn't pushy in saying, he would say that's the path you take, but he wasn't saying it's got to be this guy or it's that guy. So he said, it's up to you. And I said, but I don't even know who he is.
Yeah.
I don't know him. And he goes, well, you'll get to know him. And in those days, that's how it was.
Well, but that's an interesting perspective on marriage, though, isn't it? I mean, nowadays we think romantic love has to precede anything, whereas in those days, well, you get married and everything follows.
And that's it. Everything
and
else.
if it didn't, you put up with it for as long as you could.
Everything else. And the thing is that later on, as we got to know each other, and he would come off, and he only had one brother in Australia, and he was from Abruzzo. And he came here when he was 19. And once he said, you know, I always promised myself that I would marry a Calabrese girl. I said, why Calabrese? He goes, because they are the best. And I said, oh, okay. Wasn't that impressed. I thought, I wonder why. Well, now, of course, I've got that over his head. We've been married 52 years, and I say, don't forget.
You married the best.
You married what you wanted, the best.
Exactly. And your dad died relatively young, did he not?
Yes, he was only 59.
And what year was that?
That was in 75. It was on
so you would have been, what, 25, 26?
Pardon?
You would have been 25?
Yes. I would have been, yes, I would have been 26, I think, 25.
And do you recall the circumstances?
Yes, we were going to a wedding in Swan Hill, and we left home at around 6 o'clock. And, you know, it's funny, I know I shouldn't be sidetracking a little, but that morning we lived in the same street, because I lived in that same street with mum and dad for 17 years. My husband and I went to pick up mum and dad because we were going in my car, and mum and dad would be with us, and my sister and her husband would meet us at Kilo in the Calder Highway. And when I knocked at the door and dad opened the door, I swear this is quite strange. I looked at Papa, and he never, ever, ever looked so beautiful, so handsome. His eyes were shining and sparkling. I know he had got himself ready. He probably got up early, had a shower, whatever, but he always looked great. But that morning, he really looked different. And I said, gee, Papa, get chai. And he said, get chonyen. I said, but you look different today. And he said, what do you mean? I said, you look beautiful. And within an hour and a half, he was dead.
Right. He died on the journey.
Well, my husband was driving and he was sitting at the front, and we were talking about paisani and who we're going to meet at the wedding. And then he had a bit of a cough, and I said, Papa, are you okay? And I said, Justino, stop the car because Papa's probably not feeling well. And Justino looked at him and he said, no, cammina. I said, no, arrivamo mai. Keep going, otherwise we'll never get there. And then he reached for his handkerchief and he put his handkerchief to his mouth, and then he started to lean towards my husband's shoulder. He was gone.
Oh, goodness.
We were in the middle of nowhere near Castlemaine.
And had he been ill before?
Well, he had emphysema.
Right.
Because he was smoking, because of work, and he had already been home 1 year that he had, well, emphysema is very, very bad in itself. And so, you know, we were told by the doctor that, in fact, emphysema put pressure on his heart. And
right.
He's only 59, you know, he's young.
And so what, you had to literally turn around and...
Well, no, because you see, we got him out of the car, and I ran to a house, and my sister ran to another house to ask for help. And the lady, she kept saying to me, she was very nice, but she kept saying, don't be hysterical, hold on, if he's dead, because I said, you've got to help us quickly. And so she rang a nurse who lived in the next farm, and the nurse came with her husband, and they did that mouth-to-mouth resuscitation and the CPR and everything. And they worked on him from 7 o'clock till about 7:30. And then we were all there. And then I was just holding his face, and then I said to her, stop, because you could hear the rib cage crack because she was trying so hard, but he was gone. We lost him, and nobody stopped. That was, I found very, 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 gosh, that's heartless. Nobody stopped, that we were all with this man on the side of the road.
On the side of the road. And,
yeah. But then an ambulance came, because the lady who came to help us already rang an ambulance. And so an ambulance came, and the ambulance took him to Castlemaine Hospital. And me and my husband waited there, and my brother-in-law and my sister took Mum and brought her home. And we didn't even know that he did that, because Tony is a bit weird. He's Calabrese from Varapodio. And he didn't even tell us he was doing this. So I kept saying, where's my father? I've got to be with my father. And he was down in the morgue there. So I went down there, and I asked for a priest, and we said a few things over him. And then I had to speak to the funeral director in Castlemaine, but I stayed with him. And then they said, well, look, you go home and we'll bring your dad and we'll take him to Giannarelli where you said. I said, no. I come with my dad. Where he goes, I go. So when you take him to Melbourne, that's when we follow you to Melbourne. And so we hung around in Castlemaine until they did that.
That's what you did. And at that time, were you still working in the deli then, or were you working elsewhere?
No. By then, by the time that I hit 20, I think, I ended up working first for Bulker & Co. Solicitors. And at the time, I was working for a real estate firm. I was already there about 6 years. And sometimes Dad would come to Bell Street, Pascoe in the real estate firm, and he would see me behind an electric typewriter, a switchboard, and dealing with people as they came. I was managing the rental properties and everything, and he would have to wait for me for lunch, and I could see the pride in his face. You know, he says, my daughter, look what she can do. So.
Yeah. And how did you come to leave that job in the real estate industry?
Yeah, well, you know, I absorbed everything in that real estate industry. I was like a sponge. I ended up doing, from the receptionist, I ended up doing virtually everything. Payroll, because the principal of the real estate firm had also a cleaning company that he ran from the same building. And so I was doing payroll for his company, which had about 25 employees. And the real estate firm was a thriving, there was about 12 salesmen and everything else. And one day, Jack Walton, the former, or the late Jack Walton, walks in, and I didn't even know who he was. And he was looking for office space. And he didn't say he's a member of parliament. He just said, I'm looking for office space. And Eddie Hurd, the principal, came down, and he was about to go for lunch. I said, Mr. Hurd, Mr. Walton is looking for office space. And he goes, we haven't got anything. I said, hold on a minute, maybe we have. Just a moment. So I got the guy to sit down, and I took Mr. Hurd at the back, and I said, Mr. Hurd, you've got 2 empty rooms upstairs, 2 empty vacant rooms. I mean, why don't you release those? He goes, but there's no phone connection. I said, well, we've got a switchboard. I manage the switchboard. Let him have the rooms upstairs, one room at least. So to make a long story short, Jack Walton ended up taking an office upstairs, and we made an arrangement that I would take messages, that people would ring that state office number. I would ring him on his beeper. He would ring me back and pick up the message. And this went on for many months.
And Walton, he was a Labor Party?
He was a Labor Party, and I didn't know.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you, before this, had you had any involvement with politics?
No, except voting.
Yeah. No. And all right. So, and how long did that arrangement continue, where Walton was upstairs and you were answering?
Okay. Well, I reckon it went on for about 6 months around. And in that time, I was beginning to feel that I knew enough, and I was carrying the real estate firm and the cleaning firm. And I thought, in those days, I was getting $39 something a week. And I could hear that other girls like me, or ladies like me, or workers like me, would get about 69, 70, and they would do everything. And they used to call them Girl Fridays in those days. So I started to ask the principal whether he'll increase my wage. And I wasn't very successful. No matter what I did, no, I think you're doing very well. I said, I know I'm doing very well. So I'm virtually running the whole show here. I'm typing the contracts. I look after the landlords and pay their money by check and post them. I've got my diary. I'll do the rental. I do payrolls. I said, you've got to be able to increase my wages. And he goes, we'll talk about it next week. And he never came to the party. So I think Jack Walton sensed that was happening. And by the time, at the end of the 6 months, he ended up getting funding from the state government for his own office. And he could hear what was happening. And he said to me, he said, do you know anyone that would like to be my secretary? Because I now have funds for a secretary, for staff and an office. And I'm going to be looking for an office in Sydney Road. And I said, no, I don't know anyone. Are you sure? Yeah, I'm sure. And I think I wasn't thick. I wasn't naive. I was just passionate about getting another job. And I wasn't thinking of this guy because I thought, I don't know anything about this. And so my mum said, let's talk to ACCA. And we made an application to ACCA. I got interviewed. It was successful. And I thought it was going to come on.
That was a textile.
In the textile, where Mum worked for about 25 years,
right.
Machinery section in Broadmeadows. So in the end, he just came out right and he said, now look, he said, what about you? I heard you're going to leave this place. I said, but I don't know anything about politics, nothing at all. And he said, you don't need to know anything. In fact, he was not only a true gentleman and a wonderful guy, but he didn't even say, become a member of the Labor Party, whereas Hawke did.
Well, does that imply that he wasn't a gentleman?
Well, we all know about Bob Hawke. So as soon as I got employed with Bob Hawke, he said, now, by the way, baby, you are a member of the Labor Party, aren't you? I said, no. He goes, well, you better be. I said, oh, do I have to be? He goes, yes.
So how long did you work for Walton?
I worked 4 years for Jack.
Until he retired?
6 to when he retired in 80.
And he was in the Victorian Parliament.
Yes, in the upper house.
He was a federal member for the same seat.
The federal member for the same seat was Gordon Bryant. And
did you meet him while you were working for Walton?
Yes, I did. Gordon Bryant was next door, and he was a giant of a guy, lots of white hair, so much hair. And he used to travel to Canberra, and I got to know the staff. But I knew that that was federal. I got savvy after I became knowledgeable that this is federal and this is state. And I would travel with, I ended up, by that time when Dad passed away, I had Papa's car. So I would drive to Parliament House in Spring Street, do the work I had to do there. And then sometimes Mr. Walton, or I always called him Mr. Walton or Mr. Hawke. I could never call him by his first name. And Hawke would say, how long have you been working for me? Many years. Well, why do you call me Mr. Hawke? I said, because it is our culture and our tradition that we show you the respect of the office you represent. And he'd say, that's hogwash.
Yeah.
So I would go to Parliament House. And then when he said he was going to retire in 1980, he said, look, I think that Bob Hawke is going to seek nomination or pre-selection for Wills. Now, someone's approached me, whether I knew anybody, and I could not recommend anybody but you. So would you be interested to work for Bob Hawke? And in those days, the only Bob Hawke I knew was that aggressive, heavy-eyebrowed, nasty ACTU president on TV in the news.
But so you'd not met Bob Hawke at all?
No.
Up until then, yeah.
Until then. And when he said Bob Hawke, I had the image of this guy, the ACTU president that I would see on the news, being aggressive and I said, oh, but I don't know if I could. He said, look, Mim, if you work for him, I believe he might be Prime Minister one day, and it's a good job and you're very capable. Please, you'll do it. He needs you. I said, he needs me. He said, yes, you'll be surprised how much he needs you. So I think it was because of the connection with the community, lots of Italian speaking in Wills, Coburg, Brunswick, Pascal, Faulkner. It was as if all the Italians I knew landed in this trip. And it, you know, he didn't even, he wanted, in the end, I met him when the campaign started, and someone said, Bob, this is Mimi, who's going to work for you. And he said, oh, well, have I interviewed you? I said, no. And he said, well, shouldn't I interview you? I said, well, I think before a job, you should interview me, yes. And he said, well, come up to the ACTU office when you have a moment and we'll interview you. So when I went there, I gave him a brief rundown of what I had done, and I put down that I was commissioner because Jack Walter nominated me while I was working for him. And he was commissioner. He said to me, now, how did you swing this? I said, I didn't swing anything. Jack Walter nominated me. He said, oh, well, yeah. You know, I'm a commissioner too. I said, well, good for you. But inside I was very nervous because this was, you know, this powerhouse of a guy. But then he was really okay. He was
and so when did you start working for him? He got pre-selection, or once he won the election?
Well, he won the pre-selection,
yeah.
But the local ALP membership didn't want him because they didn't like ACTU president being parachuted into their electorate. They wanted a local. Matter of fact, I don't think Kelvin Thompson would mind my saying it, but Kelvin Thompson was the first to oppose him because he said, we don't want someone from outside, we want someone local. But he got the pre-selection, and then the campaign got going. I went and got interviewed by him. I was very nervous, honestly. I didn't know how things happen. So you see, Vincent, it's God. God works in his own ways. He looks after us. Working for him in 80, and I discovered that he was really just an ordinary human being with no one's perfect, have faults, but what I loved best about him is that he loved the Italian people.
Yeah.
Loved us immensely. Loved us.
And for how long did you work for him?
I worked for him from when he entered politics to when he resigned from politics.
So 1980 to 1992.
That's right.
Yeah. And were you always in Melbourne, or did you need to travel to?
No, I would travel to Canberra. So I remember traveling to the old Parliament House, and it was very cramped, but it was beautiful. The old Parliament House had history. And then travel also to the new Parliament House when they needed extra work or when they needed an extra hand. So we would have the other person from the pool to look after the office, and I would fly up, and it would be me and Jean Sinclair, who followed him from the ACTU days. She had worked for him 10 years when he was ACTU president, and she followed him in. She knew everything about him. She was quite an amazing lady, and she died of cancer. She was only 54, just the year before he retired from Parliament, and it was very, very distressing. She was a beautiful lady. A migrant, coming on a ship as a little girl from England. But it was very exciting times. It was very good. And you see, I need to show this too. I need to share this, that this guy came into the office just as he became Prime Minister, because he was the member for Wills from 1980 to when Labor won government in March 83. And so as soon as he became Prime Minister, he wasn't spending time in the electorate office. Before, he would come every day except Friday. So he did have that connection to his electorate. So Jean Sinclair said to me, now look, you do so much in this office, and I get away with doing nothing, and Bob gets away with doing nothing. We go to Canberra and you carry this heavy load we used to get between 800 and 900 letters a day. And I had to ask for relief or help because opening them every day, sorting them out, correspondence, it was a lot, but I loved it. I thrived on it. So she said to me, I want you to arrange 4 constituents to see him and choose your issues. You choose it. So I chose a Mr. I think it was Mr. Johnson, and he had a Veteran Affairs issue. This lady who was always coming and wanting to see her member, and she had a Social Security issue, pension. Another one had an immigration issue, and another one just had a beef about politicians. So I picked those 4 and made appointments. And she said, no, Bob, Mimi has arranged for you to see 4 of your constituents. Do you think you can see them now? You've been already the member for wills for now 3 years almost, and you haven't seen one constituent. So you're going to have to see them. He says, all right, fine. So we arranged them. We spaced them so that he would be okay with them. Well, you would understand what some constituents can be like. Very, very trying and heavy. So at the end of the day, when he had seen all, it was around 2 o'clock, he'd seen the 4 constituents. He came out in his office and he said, where's Mimi? Where is she? So he called me in and I went there and he looked disheveled. He looked exhausted. And I said, what's wrong? And he said, come here. I went closer and he put his hand on my shoulders and he said, now, which mental asylum do you want me to commit you to? Because if you look after these people day in and day out, that's where you're going to end up. And he just sort of dropped on the ground, you know, like, I can't bear this.
When did he ask you to join the Labor Party?
As soon, before I even started working for him, during the campaign.
So in 1980, you
yes,
became a member. And are you still a member? Well,
they're going to give me a medal for 40 years. I'm almost tempted not to renew my membership, but given that this is the last year, I might as well leave it.
Yeah. And tell me, did you become active? Were you an active member of the Labor Party, or was it?
Yes, I was. Now, there's something I didn't say before. When Jack Walton retired, before he asked me to work for Bob, or asked me that people are interested for me to work for Bob, he said to me, how about if you nominate for this seat? I'm retiring, you nominate for this seat. You'd be terrific at it. And I'm afraid I didn't have the confidence in those days to go all that way. And I said, no, I wouldn't be good at this. He said, yes, you would. You'd be terrific. And he really tried to encourage me to nominate. But it was my decision not to, and my husband didn't want me to. So I let that go.
Do you regret not doing it?
I think so. Just the state one I regret. But when Hawke decided to retire, he sort of shared that with me first before he made it public. And he said to me, you nominate for wills, because in reality, you have been the member for wills. I've hardly been in this office. You've carried it for all these 12 years. So you know the issues, you know the people, you know the electorate, you know the boundaries, you know everything about wills. Nominate and I'll support you. Well, you see, the timing was wrong because my mum, it was diagnosed with cancer in January 91. And she was going through her agony with this awful disease, awful illness. And so by the time he was retiring in 92, Mum was in the middle of this. And I thought, it sounds wonderful. Yes, you support me. And if Bob Hawke said it has to be heard, there would have been absolutely no opposition. But how could I do that to my mum? So for the right reasons, I said no. Otherwise, you may have been speaking to a member of parliament now.
Yeah.
Or a former member of parliament.
Oh, you might still be a member.
But no, my mum came first.
Well, that's a very touching story, again, because it's a combination of family responsibility and, in a way, a lack of self-confidence that really motivated you to reject the offer, both offers.
The first state.
Yeah.
I just didn't think that I could do it. I was down on myself.
At that time, you would remember, because Giovanni's group.
Oh, I remember Giovanni's group.
He was
He was a Calabrese member of parliament.
He was the first Calabrese-born member of parliament.
Yes.
And did you seek any guidance from him when?
No. I'm sorry. He has since passed away, but he'd be the last person on earth that I would seek guidance on. Yeah. I'm afraid I don't know how other people know him, and you shouldn't be speaking ill of the dead, but he could have done better for us.
Yeah. Well, I think it raises an interesting issue, and you may have given part of the answer. That is that when one looks at the number of Calabrese, not just in Victoria, but in Australia, the level of political participation and the level of political influence has no relationship to the number. And I was going to ask if you had any thoughts on it. Why do you think that is, that we haven't really become participants in the political process?
That's a very good question. I don't know if I can answer it adequately, because I think somehow that the Calabrese trait, you can say whatever you want about Calabrese, but they're a very unique bunch of people. They have a certain sort of standard. You know, the worst Calabrese is good Calabrese. There's something about them, and I don't think that they hold politicians high regard. I think that you know, they don't. This is what I think. I could be wrong, but I think that the Calabrese men and women wouldn't go down the political path because they don't like the politics of how it is, and they don't feel. I mean, I look at John Barilaro in New South Wales. Yeah. What a wonderful guy! He really could do well.
He is, yeah.
But yet there is this Gladys, and I can't even pronounce her name, Parachiklik or whatever it is, and she virtually, you know, demands his resignation, and the poor guy is now on mental health leave, and I think, you're a Calabrese, you shouldn't be on mental health leave.
I think he's gone back now.
Has he? Okay.
He's gone back.
But he's born, he comes from Messignadi, which is a little town 2 k's from Varapodio, where my nonna was born.
Yeah. But that's true. I mean, here in Victoria, I think the only ones I know, Lily D'Ambrosio, who's
Lily D'Ambrosio
from
do better. Yes, well, Lily D'Ambrosio is Calabrese, and again, I remember Lily when she was just joining the Labor Party, and I'm sorry, I'm disappointed. I expected much more from. Yeah. This is where I get disappointed, because she's Calabrese, Giovanni Sgro was Calabrese, and they just seemed to be out there for themselves rather than their own, you know, their own people, if you know what I mean. I'm not saying they have to, but to show that sort of, I can't explain it. I'm afraid.
Well, it's a difficult thing, though. And I was going to say the only other person in Victoria that I know who's from Calabrese origin is the former Shadow Attorney General, John Basulto.
Yes. Now, he was good.
Yeah, he was. And he hopefully he will be good, because
he's coming back
again, if he stands.
Good.
But who knows? And in New South Wales, as I say, there's John Barilaro, and the only other fellow there that I know of is Sidoti, who I think.
Oh yes, Sidoti.
Calabrese. But other than that, I don't know too many. But and then you mentioned that, you know, there are certain traits, which raises the topic of what is this thing that people sometimes refer to as Calabresità.
Yeah,
right?
Calabresità.
What is it that makes?
What is it? Well, I wonder whether it could be defined as honour, respect, their interpretation of what they believe is respect and honour. I don't know. It's a difficult question. It's a great question, Vincent.
Yeah.
Great question.
But
look at you. You're the pride. You're the jewel in our crown.
Oh no, I don't.
You're Calabrese and you're a QC.
Obviously, I would not be here. But so after Hawke resigned or retired, Calvin Thompson became the member.
Yes, he won this. No. After Hawke retired, the seat went to the independent Phil Cleary.
Oh, okay.
And Phil Cleary held it for, I think, from 92 till 96, for about a term, 4 years. Excuse me. And then Calvin nominated and won it back for the Labor Party in 96.
And you went to work for him?
Yeah. Well, in that time, I lost my mum in 94. And prior to Mum passing away, Gareth Evans. There was a lot of things that happened, you know, ups and downs in family. My husband lost the job. I had Peter in December 92, and my mum died in 94. My other son was 12. Lots of things were happening. A bit of turmoil and trauma everywhere. And Gareth Evans heard of my low time, so to speak. And he rang me. And he said, he used to call me Kiddo. And he said, now, Kiddo, I want you to come on board because I don't like the way the ALP has treated you. You've got to come on board and work for me. So when I worked for him, he was always in Canberra, but he had an office at Treasury Place. And he said, you come there and I'll give you the flexibility that if you need to go and take your mum to a specialist, you do it. You don't need to ask my permission. You've done too much for us. And so with all his faults or whatever, Gareth Evans was good to me. And he held on to me until he nominated for the seat of Isaacs, so that from Senate, he went to the House of Reps. But his office was in Springvale, and there was no way that I could go and work in Springvale. And so then I had a temporary job with the Coburg Chamber of Commerce, which was very good. And it was only a 6-month job. And then Calvin came on board and said, you know, why don't you come and work for me? And then I was there with him for 18 years.
Yeah. And what sort of work did you do in the community whilst you were working for these politics?
Well, virtually everything. When I say everything, it's awful to say because people say, well, what do you mean by that? But whatever, like Italian groups, I would assist with the council to formulate the Italian pensioners group for this group, that group. They would ring if they needed help, all sorts of things. What else can I say? I was part of a neighbourhood house. I would be part of an executive of one of the pensions group to assist them along because the population was ageing of the Italians in the area. And as their children would grow and they get married, they move away, the old folks would be left on their own. And so they would come to me with documents to fill in, letters they received, even in Italian, that they didn't understand what this is about. And there was a great connection. I still have a great connection with lots and lots of people in the area that know me, because then I became the familiar face that they feel comfortable to come to when they needed some assistance.
And after Calvin Thompson retired, you continued to work for the new member, didn't you, for a little while?
Yes, I did, for Peter Khalil. Now, Peter Khalil is Egyptian, the origine Egiziano. His mum and dad were born in Port Said, the port where the ship
went through.
And he's okay, but he's the sort of, he's really a good member, very, very proactive, ambitious. That's good. You can't condemn that. But he wanted younger people to organize his Facebook, to organize that. And I thought, well, you still can do that because you've got allocation of 4 staffers, but you've got the anchor in your office. So you've got all these young people, they float in, they float out, some come, some don't go. Sometimes they don't come for work and you don't know what's happening. We've got to ring them up and say what's going on. But moi, I was always there 8:30 in the morning, 12:30 at night, 6. I was the anchor, you know. But he obviously felt that he wanted to reduce my time to 2 days a week. I wanted to work full time. We didn't agree on those things. And so then I moved away.
And are you still working?
Yes, I am. And now I'm working full circle with the little paesani in Patronato in West Brunswick.
Right, with
Frank Calabria. And I've got to tell you my first day, Vincent, my first there was very different from all those office places that I worked before in all those years. The door opened and someone says, buongiorno. And I go, buongiorno. Ma tu sei una faccia nuova. I said, yes, I am new. And who are you? So I said, I'm new. I work here. Today's my first day. Oh, okay. Well, my name is Maria and I pass by whenever I feel like it here. Good. Nice to see you. It was like being in a paese in Barapodio.
It's good. And now you mentioned before, what is this Calabresita? But and you mentioned that there are some traits that you think Calabrese have. Obviously, in your own life,
Yes.
your own sense of responsibility to your family is what induced you to do what a lot of people nowadays will not do, and that is move in with your sick mother and basically care for her until her death.
Yes. Yes, that was the last.
That's one of the positive traits of Calabrese, that there is this, up until recently, there has been this sense that, you need to, A, you can rely on your family, and B, you need to help your family, which is what the other aspect that seems to me is that you were alluding to is this notion of individualism, that you really, other than the family, you need to rely on your own resources to succeed.
Yes.
That's both a positive and a negative, because it's negative in the sense that it's very difficult to have a collective action as a community. We all want to go off and do our own things, and I think that's reflected, and I'm going to ask you, in the way that the numbers of social clubs were formed back in the 60s, which appear to me to have been more related to the paese from which the members belong to, than this notion of we're all Calabrese, we can have the one club to which we all belong. And I think you were involved in the formation of at least one club, were you not?
Yes, we are founding members of the Reggio Calabria Club.
And that's had a very, so shall I say...
Yes, very checkered.
Checkered history.
Yes, checkered history. Well, you see, we used to meet above a little shop in Sydney Road, Brunswick, and the joy that we had in the Reggio Calabria Club was great. And I remember that I used to speak to Natale Surace, who was president of the Reggio Calabria Club for many, many years. He's since passed away. And he had a little bit of an aversion to me because he felt that I had too many ideas, I was too proactive, and he didn't like that in a woman. There's a place for a woman to be. And, this one comes out of the box and she should go back in her box. So I always used to say, Nat, I'm a founding member, my husband's a founding member, we've got founding members, and now we can start the building, because we ended up with the Jack Tripovich Reserve, where the club is now. And it was given to us on a sort of gift, if you like. And so it was never starting. And so I said, well, at one of our AGM meetings, I said, well, look, there's 300 of us here. If each one puts $1,000 as a founding member, we end up with 300,000. We can start something. And things kicked off. And he didn't like that I came up with the idea instead of him. That started. Then I said, we've got to give something back to our members. He says, like what? I said, our culture. We should have Italian languages, classes, or assisting our young Italians. We should talk to them about our religious traditions and what we have, when we do our procession and all that. We need to do that. And he said, well, why don't you do that then? I said, what, you're going to give me that responsibility? He said, yeah. I said, all right, we'll do it. So for a while at the Reggio Calabria Club, I located a young teacher who would come once a week, and she would assist the Italian children of our members with their HSC, called VCE Italian. I would have the little ones, come l'asilo, and we would talk to them about, we would have little classes, little games, we would sing Italian songs, we would do all that. And I would have a newsletter, I would do all the little newsletter and tell mum and dad what we're doing with the kids. Then we started to have them dress in traditional costumes. It was really taking off beautifully. It was really doing well. But then somewhere along the line, someone started saying that, oh, it's a bit sad, but someone started saying, what's the use? Why do we have to do this? We're wasting time. I've got to give her the keys. And I thought, well, you know, it just started to, the oxygen was removed. But to this day, when I go to Arena Brothers to buy my delicatessens, Teresa is there, who married one of the Arena brothers. And she was a little girl when she used to come there. She said, oh, man, it was the best times of my life. So I think it's up to us to be able to give something, because the other generation will move on.
Well, that raises another interesting issue, and that's this, though, isn't it? That all of these clubs have not attracted the younger generation, it seems to me.
No, they haven't.
And, you know, the question's got to be asked, what happens when the older people that are in control now go?
What happens?
But more significantly, I think also explains why, for a lot of the younger people, this notion of Calabrese means something entirely different to what it may mean to you and me, because they haven't had the benefit of what you would say is the oral tradition of being told stories, or being in a learning environment when they can be told. And
that's right.
Maybe, you know, that's one of the things that may need to be addressed.
Well, maybe, Vincent, what you're doing with this wonderful association that you've initiated may be a beginning of that, to give them the interest of what we can have.
I didn't initiate it. There's a group of us that have done it, but it's part of our aim. But these are questions that I think are interesting, because they need to be addressed and analysed, because what is to happen with all these clubs? I mean, you mentioned the Reggio Calabria Club. There's also the other Calabria Club.
Yes, in Epping.
There's the Caolonia Club, which, I don't know, I think it might still be running.
There's a Joy Tauro Club.
Yeah, well, there you go. They're all from...
Well, isn't it sad, sorry to interrupt, isn't it sad that the Veneto Club is one club? It's an umbrella for all the North. We, as the kind of wonderful historic place we come from, such history, such richness, and we're not able to unify and have one club. Under one umbrella, we can say all Calabrese, from Cosenza, Catanzaro, Reggio, we all are one. Invece you know, some pull for themselves for years, some pull, it's just too fragmented.
Well, I think you're right. There is fragmentation, but what we're experiencing with the association is that people are attracted to the idea of trying not, and I have to say, we're not interested in replicating what the social clubs have done, because we don't want to.
It won't work.
But we are interested in promoting the Calabrese culture and the Calabrese customs. And it seems to me that the other question that needs to be addressed is this, that the Calabria that the older people know and the customs of which they try to preserve is not the Calabria that exists today in Italy, in Calabria. And it's not the Calabria that will really appeal to the younger generation, because for a number of reasons, but one of the most important of them is that there's obviously now much more intermarriage between Calabrese and others than there was in the 60s, the 50s and the 70s. And so I think that our function is to try and welcome all of those people, because the essential elements of Calabrese, I think, are still pretty much the same, and that is the sense of family, the sense of responsibility, the sense of contributing, although we do it in a silent fashion, in the sense that we don't brag about what we do. And one of the functions of this program is to show that ordinary people can do great things.
Yes.
And that in fact Calabrese in Australia have done great things, although a lot of people may not know about it. And one of the things that we'd like to do is to actually get someone to write a history of the Calabrese
Wow.
contribution.
That sounds wonderful.
So there's a lot of, and I'm saying this because anyone who's listening, we appeal to you, A, to participate, and B, to give us your ideas, because the more people are involved, the better they will, the better it is. So going strong.
Yes.
Within the community.
I'm still working within my own little community now. I feel as if I've made a full circle back dining room table with my little Calabrese stories.
Well, that's a good thing in a way, isn't it? That,
it is. It's beautiful. And I come home, I share them with my two sons, sort of, oh yeah, okay. So because I see the enthusiasm in my two sons, I've decided to write.
Oh, good on you.
Experience of my migration. I did research for my mum, my dad. I went to the National Archives. I've got the actual passengers list when my father arrived with everything. I've got heaps of stuff. And I keep saying to my two sons, one day when I'm not here, and you say, I wish I could ask that question to mum, you're going to go to this little manuscript I'm going to write, and you'll find the answer there, because your roots come from Calabria through me.
Yeah, well, and don't just keep it within yourself. I think think about publishing as well, because it's important.
Well, it is important.
To disseminate that first-hand story and information for everybody. And it's
well, could I be cheeky to share a little story when I was working for Bob Hawke about a little Aussie guy who came in and said some things. He had just become Prime Minister, and he walked in, it was a Mr. Hughes, and he said to me, I want to speak to my member. And I said, well, your member is now the Prime Minister of Australia, so he's not going to be here. He's in Canberra. So you're going to have to talk to me. And he said, well, I don't want to talk to you. I want to talk to my federal member. I have a right to speak to my federal member. I voted for him. Yes, but you've got to understand, he's now Prime Minister and he's in Canberra. That's why I'm employed here. So tell me what your issue is, and I will do my best to resolve it. And he says, well, my issue is that I want to speak to him. I said, well, what do you want to say to him? Because I promise you, I will give him your message. When will you do that? I said, well, I may be going to Canberra next week. I'll see him there and I will give you your message, I promise. Will you really? Yes. Okay, well, take down my name. He gave me his name, his address. And he said, now I want you to write this. Yeah, so here I am, Whitey. I want you to tell for him to get all these wogs, put them in a boat and send them back where they came from. And I went, okay, you want me to get that message to the Prime Minister? Yes. Okay, so I wrote it. And he was standing over me and I said, now tell me, do you mind if I ask you, what did these wogs do to you that you should have that opinion? Because you know what? I know these wogs. They rolled up their sleeve, they came into this country, they embraced work, they built, and they became part of this fabric. And they love Australia. So I don't understand why you feel that way. He says, oh, well, I have a grandson, and my grandson mixes with these wogs. But my grandson hasn't got a job. And all these little wog mates have jobs. I said, okay, well, I can tell you how that happens. The little wog mates network, maybe an uncle, a cousin, or a job, and they get a job. So what does your grandson do all day? He goes over to the CES and sits there all day. Well, that was the Commonwealth Employment Service. I said, well, that's not going to get him a job, but I'll tell you what we'll do. You give me your grandson's name, his, which CES office does he go to? Brunswick. Okay. Give me his full name, date of birth, Brunswick, and I'll promise you I'll get him a job. What is he looking for? What's he doing? And he told me at the time, I can't remember. I said, okay, well, I'll get him a job. And he goes, you will? I said, I promise you that I will try very hard to get him a job. So is that okay? He goes, yes, but I said, now look, Mr. Hughes, the wogs are going to be here long after you and I are dust in the wind. And there's probably more coming from God knows from where. So go home, make a cup of tea, have your scone, and don't worry about the wogs because they're not going to harm you and they're okay. They're a good bunch. And he says, well, you're a very nice girl to offer to help my grandson. what's your name? And I thought, uh-oh.
You should
I
have
said, well, my name is really Domenica, but they call me Mimi. And he goes, Mimi? No, he said before, these wogs have the best jobs in Australia.
Yeah.
Kept insisting about the wogs having the best jobs. And I said, but I'm called Mimi here at work. And he goes, Mimi, what kind of name is that? What's your surname? I said, Tamburino. He said, well, what have you done? Have you gone off and married one of these wogs? I said, no, I came here to Australia from Italy in 1958. And he looked at me and his jaw dropped. I said, so you see, I'm one of those wogs. And his jaw dropped and he walked away and he said, I was right. They're everywhere, these wogs, even in the Prime Minister's office. Well, at the end of that week, I used my contacts. I rang him up. I got an interview for his grandson and his grandson got a job. And that guy would come in every week and he would always come with a bunch of chocolates, a bunch of flowers or something. And he would say, I'm so sorry. And I said, look, don't worry about it. I said, but I will tell the Prime Minister. So when I went one time to Canberra, we went for dinner after Parliament sat. And at the table was Mick Young. You remember Mick Young?
I do. Yeah.
Mick Young was sitting there.
The Paddington Bear.
Pardon?
The Paddington Bear.
The Paddington Bear, but he was a shearer by trade.
I know.
So he was a real worker. So Mick Young was there, John Brown, Button, what was John Button,
Yeah.
Barry Jones, who lives here in Brunswick. Anyway, there was a few people there and we went for dinner and I had already told Hawke about the story. I had said, look, Mick Hugh said this, my constituents going in, relay the story. So I relayed the story and it was just hilarious. Everybody was great because he
It was.
didn't mean any harm. It was just, he didn't mean any harm. He was just angry.
Usually that sort of attitude is based on ignorance and fear.
Yes.
Yes, as evidenced by the fact that.
So there's lots of little incidents and things like that.
It's a common story. But look, Mimi, we've gone.
Please forgive me for going on too long.
Say no, it's been good. But look, thank you very much
Very welcome.
for participating. And,
Thank you for having me.
we continue doing what you've been doing, and we may call on you to give us assistance with some projects if we may.
I would love to. I would love to be of assistance in some way, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Vincent.
Okay.
Thanks, Sam.
Bye.
Ciao.
Ciao.